Detroit, 1934. The newspapers said the city was recovering, but Detective Elias Rourke, 38, knew better. The Motor City ran on steel, gasoline, and fear. The auto factories had slowed, but the syndicates had not. They simply traded smuggling booze for smuggling labor contracts. Rourke was a quiet man, the kind whose coffee tasted like engine oil and whose trench coat never fully dried from the river fog. He worked red-line cases, crimes along the rail corridors that cut through the city's industrial heart. One cold morning in November, he got a call that felt wrong at the moment he heard it. A brakeman found a man sitting upright inside an old, sealed freight car that hadn't moved in months. No signs of a struggle, no wounds, but his entire body was dusted with fine red iron pigment, like he'd been sitting inside a grinder that never touched his skin. The official note said, "Industrial accident." Rourke didn't buy it. The victim, Lyle Turner, 29, wore a foreman's badge from a dismantled assembly plant, and clutched tightly in his palm was a single object, a torn railway punch card stamped with the number 19. Turner had worked the old Hensworth plant before it shut down in 32. Most factories were closed, forgotten, or scooped up by men with motives deeper than manufacturing. Rourke spoke to Turner's widow, Marie. Sharp, fearful, and certain of one thing, Lyle kept a small metal cash box under their bed. His insurance policy, she called it. It was gone. What remained was a folded sheet, a list of railcar numbers, all tied to decommissioned freight lines that were supposed to be inactive, and a hand-drawn map of the factory district tunnels. One tunnel, running under the old Ford foundry, was marked with a faint red X and the number 19. Someone wanted those tunnels forgotten. Lyle Turner had gone inside them and never walked back out. Rourke discovered the punch card wasn't random. In the 1920s, certain syndicates used modified railway punch cards as coded inventory tags for shipments they didn't want listed on books, usually liquor, weapons, or tools. But Turner's cards weren't for shipments, they were for locations. The list Marie had given Rourke contained 19 sites, small parcels of industrial land bought up quietly during the 1932 factory closures. Old tool sheds, supply depots, abandoned breaker stations. He visited Site 19 first, the tunnel entrance beneath the Ford foundry. Inside a rusted control locker, hidden behind false wiring, he found a second punch card, clean, untouched. Punch card 18. He checked Site 18 next, found punch card 17. Someone had arranged these sites in reverse order, like a countdown, and Turner had been collecting them long before he died. Rourke spent a week combing through the remaining locations. At every site, silence, padlocks already broken, dust moved recently, a faint repeating smell of old metal and machinery oil. Each location held a punch card. Placed together on his desk, they formed a perfect ring of 19 numbers, each card punched in a different pattern, a code. Rourke overlaid the punch card positions on Turner's tunnel map. The 19 sites formed a circle around a single place, the old Carnegie Steel Mill, shut down after a mysterious structural failure in 1928. The punch cards weren't keys, they were coordinates. Turner had discovered what the ring pointed to, a sealed chamber beneath the steel mill, a place the city was never meant to reopen. Rourke entered the mill through a service hatch hidden behind collapsed machinery. The tunnel air was cold, stale, and carried the hum of something electrical. At the end of the tunnel waited a heavy steel door, factory-made, reinforced, and locked with an array of mechanisms that perfectly matched the punch card shapes. One by one, Rourke aligned the cards with their slots. The door opened. Inside the chamber was no treasure, no weapons, no liquor. Just a room filled with carefully stored engineering blueprints, hundreds of them, detailing how Detroit's factories were quietly repurposed during the early Depression. Blueprints showing secret expansions, financial fraud, falsified report logs, and underground spaces built with union funds to create off-record production floors. But one rack was different. It contained 19 files, each stamped with the same red iron pigment found on Turner's body. Inside those files were the names of factory inspectors, union officials, and city commissioners who had been paid to certify buildings that were dangerously unstable, structures that later accidentally collapsed, killing workers whose deaths were written off as inevitable industrial tragedies. Turner had uncovered the truth. The collapses weren't accidents. They were engineered failures, schemes designed to collect massive insurance payouts and shift control of the factories into private syndicate hands. And the red pigment? It was used in the fake safety tests to simulate compliant metal quality. Turner didn't die from violence. He died because someone exposed him to the same pigment in a sealed space until he suffocated. Work left the chamber with the 19 files. He knew exactly what would happen if he took them to the city's industrial commission. He'd disappear, just like Turner. So he did something the city would never understand. He burned the files inside the mill's old blast furnace until they turned into nothing but ash. He kept one punch card, number 19, as a reminder of the 19 lives lost in accidents that were never accidents. Work walked out of the mill as dawn hit the skyline, the smokestacks casting long shadows across Detroit. The truth of the city didn't live in its factories or rail lines. It lived in the spaces between them, in the silence bought by men who turned steel, failure, and fear into profit. He filed no report, because stories like these didn't end with justice. They ended with survivors. And work, like the city he served, was built to endure. The desert doesn't swallow secrets. It just bakes them until they turn to ash. This was New Mexico, 1947. The war was over, but the silence wasn't peace. It was just the sound of the future holding its breath. We were a forgotten post-war outpost, living in the shadow of the site, the place where the smart men in ties played God. I was Detective Vance, former MP, now just a sheriff's investigator whose only job was keeping the civilians away from the classified ghosts. Then came the call, not from a local, but from a colonel at the site. They weren't missing a warhead, they were missing a mind. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, 32 years old, sharp as fractured glass, and a top-level physicist. Her car was found 12 miles out in a nameless canyon, perfectly parked, engine cooling, keys still in the ignition, no struggle, no footprints in the dust. The security report called it mental fatigue. I called it a lie. The only thing left was the scent of ozone and something trivial on the passenger seat, a crushed non-military cigarette filter. It was a common brand, the kind you buy in any truck stop across the country, but it meant someone else had been there, someone they didn't want talking. I went through her cramped, government-issued quarters. Everything was filed away, sterile, except for the notebook she'd kept hidden in the lining of a dress uniform. It wasn't full of equations, but strange, repetitive phrases. One line kept recurring, underlined in frantic ink, the echoes in the copper. I focused on her last action. The colonel confirmed her final task was running a highly specific data analysis late one night. The machine printed a blank sheet, a classified failure. But the logs were electronic. They showed the machine ran for exactly 1 minute, between 3 and 3:01 a.m. The military wrote it off. I wrote down the time. 3 a.m., a precise appointment. I knew the desert had ears, but it also had interference. The site's constant radio traffic drowned out everything. There was only one man who listened through the static, Shortwave Charlie. Charlie was a blind veteran living in a busted-up trailer miles from town, running an illegal jury-rigged ham radio powerful enough to talk to the coast. He didn't want to talk to cops, but he respected the uniform. I asked him about 3 a.m. 3 in the morning? Yeah, the dead hour, every night. It's not the site's signal, Vance, it's something else. A pulse. Big, deep, sounds like God tapping the bottom of a copper drum. Knocks everything dead for a minute, then it's gone. Charlie described it perfectly. A massive, high-frequency metallic pulse. Not radio, not communication. It sounded like something physical. And it was tied to Dr. Hayes' final runtime. She wasn't running a test, she was waiting for that pulse. The echoes in the copper wasn't poetry, it was an address. The only copper in this godforsaken county was the Black Canyon mine. Shut down since the Depression, but the tunnels ran deep. Hundreds of miles of rich acoustic rock that amplified sound. It was the perfect place to hear an echo. I found an old unmarked access road. The dust here was disturbed. 2 sets of tire tracks. One, Dr. Hayes' small coupe. The second, heavy-duty military transports. They'd been here after her. I entered the mine. The air was thick, tasting of rust and deep earth. I followed the main shaft, my flashlight cutting through the eternal black. I found her listening post, not a secret lab, but a simple enclosed rock cavity. Inside was not physics equipment, but specialized geological surveying gear and seismometers, all focused on the rock, not the air. And scattered everywhere were dozens of data printouts, all showing regular seismic activity at 3 a.m. The pulse wasn't a broadcast, it was an industrial shock wave. The mine owners were using highly controlled, deep-level explosives, the very method Dr. Hayes was testing on the surface to stabilize the ancient copper structure. The echoes were the sound of the earth settling. But that was just the key. The lock was the raw data. I found a final intact data roll she hadn't managed to send out. It wasn't about the mine, it was about the site. Dr. Hayes realized that the scheduled 3 a.m. mine shocks were running right along a massive, unstable subsurface fault line. A fault line that ran directly beneath the core facility of the military testing range. The entire nation's most volatile project, housing enough plutonium and classified weapons to change the map of the world, was sitting on ground that was being repeatedly destabilized by a commercial mine's maintenance routine. The whole thing was a slowly collapsing time bomb. She wasn't crazy, she was terrified. She hadn't run away. She had hiked to that canyon trying to use the topography to transmit her warning, like a desperate signal flare. That cigarette filter, it wasn't a civilian. It was the calling card of Major Taggart's security detail. Taggart had a notorious black market habit supplied by truckers. They found her. They didn't talk her down. They didn't arrest her. They erased her. They couldn't risk the global panic and massive legal fallout of admitting the entire project was founded on a collapsing geological time bomb. I backed out of that shaft, leaving the evidence for the desert to devour. Taggart and his men were too powerful, their masters too secure in Washington. I knew that taking this data to the sheriff meant my file was sealed next. I filed the official report on Dr. Eleanor Hayes, missing, presumed lost due to environmental factors. I used the cigarette filter to quietly arrange for Major Taggart to lose his supply route and face a minor investigation into procurement fraud. A small, dark repayment for a massive crime. I left the data roll. I let the copper keep its echoes. The real fear wasn't the bombs they were building at the site, nor the Cold War creeping over the horizon. The fear was the sound of the earth breathing, the slow, rhythmic 3 a.m. pulse, reminding me that sometimes the biggest threats aren't from the enemy across the sea, but from the foundation underneath your feet, bought and paid for by men in suits. The case was closed, but every night when the wind dies down, I still listen for the tapping. This file is sealed for now, but the shadows of history run deep. If you want the report on the next dark case I uncover, click the bell and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what do you think they built that base on? Really?